Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. This episode is brought to you by CuriosityStream, a subscription streaming service that offers thousands of documentaries and non-fiction titles from some of the world's best filmmakers, including exclusive originals. CuriosityStream is the Netflix for nerds, the Hulu for history buffs, the Disney Plus for the scientist in us. CuriosityStream is also extremely affordable at under $20 a year. That's just $1.67 per month. I really enjoy using CuriosityStream. I've been going through the crime and forensic section, and there are some very interesting series out there. I'm also a fan of the nature section, watching the animal programs. You can watch on many platforms. There's a web app, Roku, Android, Xbox One, smart TVs, iOS, Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Amazon Kindle, and Apple TV. This is available worldwide and with new shows coming every week. Go to curiositystream.com/TCR for unlimited access to the world's top documentaries and non-fiction series. If you use the promo code TCR, you will save 25% off, which comes out to only $14.99 a year. So click the link below or go to curiositystream.com/TCR and save 25% right now. For today's true crime narration, a regular Reddit user, Moondog151, has supplied today's story for me. Now we shall be looking at the shocking crime of Steve Gurrie from Grenada. Grenada, in the Caribbean, is made up of a main island and several smaller islands, with beautiful beaches, stunning waterfalls, and a tropical climate. Tourism revenue is one of the most important factors in Grenada's economy. It is considered to be one of the safer parts of the Caribbean, and as such, the events of the 3rd of May 2010 shocked this small nation to the core. At 5:50 p.m. on that Monday, Police Sergeant Derek Benjamin was working on the reception desk of Grenville Police Station when he saw a silver van pull up in front of the building. As it stopped in the middle of the road, Derek watched with curiosity as the driver exited the vehicle carrying a white bucket. Derek's curiosity turned to alarm when he saw that the man, who was wearing a brown short-sleeved top and blue jeans, appeared to be covered in blood. The man entered the police station and once he reached the desk, poured the contents of the bucket onto the counter. 2 severed heads spilled out onto the reception desk. At the sight of this scene, a female police officer fainted and collapsed to the floor in total shock. The man simply said, "I just killed 2 men there." He was immediately arrested and identified as 39-year-old Steve Gurrie. Local news reports also confirmed that Steve was known locally by the nickname of Rat Poison. It would appear that Steve had a relatively typical background. His childhood was described as normal and he was said to be a loving and kind person. At the time of the murders, he was in a relationship with an unnamed woman whose mother described Steve as a gentle person who was very good to her and her daughter. However, it was soon discovered that Steve had a criminal record. He had been convicted of assault in 2006, after which he was ordered to pay a fine of $500 and $800 in compensation. Steve's parents had moved out of the country and he had recently spent some time visiting his father in New York. On the same day as the killings, his mother had arrived in Grenada to care for Steve's grandmother, who was sick. Steve worked for a rubbish collection company and also completed landscaping work, which he was doing at the time of the murders. Steve was interviewed for around 8 hours, during which time he appeared to be quite calm and barely said a word. He did, however, tell the police officers that he needed to leave, otherwise he would miss his flight. Efforts to identify the heads were soon underway. The first belonged to a former retired police officer named Clyde Greenidge. After retiring from the police force, Clyde owned both a local tavern and a farm. The second head belonged to a farmhand by the name of Christopher Stafford. Once identification had been made, Inspector Harold Frame, along with other police officers under his command, headed to Balthazar, St Andrew, to search Clyde's farm. As the police walked through the farm, they recovered a white top that appeared to be stained with blood. Around 15 metres away from the blood-soaked top, the police discovered freshly cut grass and vines hiding a beheaded body. This body was identified as Clyde Greenwich. The search continued, and approximately 60 metres away, the police discovered the beheaded body of Christopher Stafford. Near Christopher's body was a blood-stained cutlass, which was determined to be the murder weapon. Examinations of the bodies was conducted by Dr. Keith Johnson at around 7:45 p.m. that same day. It was determined that Clyde was in the initial stages of rigor mortis and had been dead for approximately 2 hours, while Christopher was in rigor mortis and had been killed around an hour before Clyde. Dr. Johnson determined that the heads were severed from the bodies by a sharp-edged instrument more than 7 inches long that had been applied with excessive force. This matched with the cutlass that was found at the crime scene. The actual autopsy was conducted by Dr. Elizabeth Carballosa Velasquez. She observed several deep wounds and gashes to both bodies, with the final cause of death being massive blood loss from the various wounds in addition to the decapitation. The conclusion that Christopher Stafford was killed before Clyde Greenwich would also be supported when the police discovered a witness. At 5 p.m, almost an hour before Steve Gurrie walked into the police station, a man by the name of David Richards met with Clyde to view a plot of land on Clyde's farm at St Andrew. David stated that he had noticed Steve Gurrie was on the farm at that time. Steve was wearing a white t-shirt and blue jeans and was holding a cutlass along with a beer. David told the police that Clyde had asked Steve if he knew where Christopher was, as Clyde had not seen him in a while. Steve replied that Christopher was unwell and that he would go and check on him. Less than 10 minutes later, Steve returned stating that he could not find Christopher. David and Clyde then continued their conversation about the plot of land. At around 5:25 p.m, Steve approached David and Clyde and told them that Christopher still had not returned. David then left, leaving Clyde and Steve at the farm. Grenada Broadcasting Network also interviewed another witness, a local Balthazar resident called Mr. Leslie Phillip, and he described what he saw.
This is a fact. I saw them walking yesterday. They walked together.
Who you saw walking together?
The one, Steve and Chris. And the 3 of them was here. As I said, the guy went out there happily to sell a piece of land to a nurse.
That's Greenwich?
That's Greenwich. Happily. And then the other 2 walk up after that as friends. Walk up there. I see them with my eyes.
That's the one who allegedly killed and the other one, Steve?
Yeah, I saw them. I didn't see no stress level. I didn't see anything like he was looking funny or anything, he just wave as usual and.
Shortly afterwards, Steve walked into the police station, having killed both Clyde and Christopher. The day after the murders, 4th of May, Steve was sent to Mount Gay Psychiatric Hospital, where he was examined by Dr. Esperanza Swaby, who diagnosed Steve with paranoid schizophrenia. This included him feeling that people were talking about him and even questioning his sexuality. During the examination, Steve spoke of feeling as if people were laughing and talking about him, and said that he constantly heard voices in his head which, in recent times, had become more and more offensive, louder, and persistent to the point that Steve had started drinking alcohol in an attempt to drown them out. When asked about the crime, he stated that along with the voices in his head, he felt that both Clyde and Christopher had been laughing at him, and he became so angry that he attacked them and cut off their heads with the murder weapon. Dr. Esperanza stated that Steve felt as if he had done nothing wrong and didn't know why he was being detained. Steve was also examined by Dr. Keith J.B. Ricks, a psychiatrist with over 30 years of experience. Dr. Ricks diagnosed Steve with schizophrenia or a schizophrenia-like illness. Dr. Ricks also stated that although Steve showed no active signs of a mental illness at the time of his examination, that it was likely that he was experiencing a psychotic episode at the time of the murders. Dr. Ricks also confirmed that Steve was aware of the nature of the attacks and that he had killed 2 people. He further stated the defendant had an aberration of mind and concluded that he was not of sound mind and suffering from a defect of reasoning due to a disease of the mind. In addition, he noted that Steve's years of excessive drinking only served to exasperate his problems, and also that he was in remission at the time of the examination. However, there is no evidence that Steve had been drinking heavily at the time of the murders, and whether he was even an excessive drinker has been called into question. Upon being returned to the station, Steve was questioned further and simply said, "Officer, all I know, I killed them." Steve stated that he was friends with Clyde and that they had a good relationship. When Steve was questioned about Christopher, he stated that he did not know the man's name, but had no problem with him as the pair had only ever briefly spoken. Steve also said that he knew he was being questioned for bringing the severed heads into the police station. He said that he had gotten the heads from Clyde's farm and that he knew one of them belonged to Clyde, but again stated that he didn't know the name of the other man. He was then asked about what had happened, and he stated that he was given the cutlass which belonged to Clyde in order to cut the grass. When they were carrying the grass up the road, Steve said that his mind and voices in his head told him to behead Christopher. It took around 1 or 2 swings to fully behead him. Steve knew that during this time, Clyde was away getting some beers, and when he returned, Steve drank 2 beers while Clyde drank 1. Steve could not remember how long afterwards that he had killed Clyde or how many times he had swung at him. Again, Steve stated that his mind and voices in his head told him to behead Clyde. Afterwards, Steve put both of the heads into a bucket and stole Clyde's van to drive directly to the police station. Steve Gurrie had his first court appearance on May the 6th and was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and held without bail. He did not have an attorney present during this hearing and remained silent throughout. Large crowds gathered outside of the courthouse to heckle him as he entered and left court. It was even said that it was the largest ever crowd for a single legal matter, and thus a heavy police presence was needed. The police had to use a decoy to distract the crowd whilst getting Steve in and out of the courthouse. Many of Steve's friends and relatives were in disbelief and felt that he was incapable of committing such an act. Many were having difficulty reconciling the fact that he had done this. Steve's former employer spoke about him in positive terms, and it was even implied that they'd be willing to hire Steve again if he was released. Steve was indicted on January 4th, 2011. On October the 26th, he was given a 3rd psychiatric evaluation, this time by Dr. Harry Wood. Dr. Wood also determined that at the time of the incident, Steve was suffering from an altered state of mind and that his responses indicated he was suffering from psychosis. However, none of the 3 psychiatric examinations suggested treatment or stated whether or not Steve remained a threat to society at large. Steve Gurrie ended up expressing remorse for his action in one of his more lucid moments, and on December 28, 2011, he wrote a letter addressed to the families of Clyde Greenwich and Christopher Stafford. In this letter, he expressed his deep regret and sorrow at what he had done and stated that he had taken responsibility for his actions. The letter was never delivered to the families, but it was read aloud in the court. He is reported to be completely remorseful and has difficulty coping and coming to terms with what he has done. Steve's second arraignment took place on October 9th, 2013. The prosecutor was Chris Greenwich, who was no relation to the victim, while Steve was represented by Ruggles Ferguson. At the arraignment, Steve, acting on the advice of his attorney, pled guilty to all charges brought before him, thus saving everyone the ordeal of a trial. At sentencing, because diminished responsibility is not considered a valid defence for those charged with murder, the defence instead argued for leniency, citing his insanity, possible intoxication, remorse, and his cooperation with the investigation. The prosecution countered this by stating that the crime was exceptionally violent, involved more than one victim, and how the attack appeared unprovoked. The judge, after hearing all the arguments, finally decided on sentencing. Taking into account the horrific nature of the crime, but also Steve's guilty plea, remorse, mental state and chances of rehabilitation, the judge decided to spare him the death penalty. Even the Prime Minister at that time, Tillman Thomas, commented on the case as it was that big a news story. On December 13th, 2013, Steve was sentenced to 35 years imprisonment with time served taken into account. The only prison on the island is Richmond Hill Prison. Furthermore, the judge ordered that he be examined by a psychiatrist every 6 months to determine any treatment that may be needed. It was also stated that if the evaluation showed favourable results and improvement in Steve's mental state, he would have his sentence reviewed after 25 years, with the possibility of early release then being considered. In 2019, it was reported that his sentence was one of many that had been appealed, but I have been unable to find any further updates about this, and as such assume that he remains in prison until this day. That concludes the shocking crime of Steve Gurrie. Thanks once again to Moondog151 on Reddit. I'll put a link in the description to their page. Please add any comments down below, and thanks very much for listening to the Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. Grenada is famous for having the world's first ever underwater sculpture park. Goodbye.